Hey everyone, this is FrSky Steve. I do welcome you to the channel. Today we're going to be covering what you need to do in order to get your receiver completely set up properly for Ethos 1.6. This is the new firmware. As the time of recording this was firmware 3.0.1 for the receiver. It's also 3.0.1 for the internal module. And Ethos 1.6 is out. Ethos 1.6.1 is about to be released. You might be watching this a little bit later on. You might have an older version of a firmware, and you're going to need to go through all these down steps. And I'm going to discuss with you the correct way of doing this. I'm also going to bring up a topic that might not be what you want to hear, but it is something that I'd leave it up to you. I give you the information and you can make up your decision for yourself. But essentially what happens is part of this process is to do a factory reset. And what a factory reset does is it just wipes out all the previous bind and registration information. I will tell you that if you have a plane you absolutely love, it's something that you cannot possibly see yourself losing for any reason, then you probably want to go the extra mile to make sure that this receiver is set up as well as you possibly can. And a factory reset was something that I brought up maybe 2 years ago. It's like, oh my gosh, we really need a factory reset. People were sending in the receivers into us because they would get stuck in some process. A lot of times it had to do with stabilized receivers. There was just no way to get themselves out of it. Factory reset, what it does is it wipes out everything. And sometimes there's like old bind information in there or registration information. And it's stuck in there and it kind of interferes with the performance of the receiver. So when you clean it out, the best way to do is a factory reset, because that just completely resets everything and brings it down to absolute beginning. Now, I have worked with little microprocessors now on and off for about the past decade. And the one thing I will tell you is every once in a while, I will go through my cell phone or my tablets, whatever I own, and I will perform a factory reset on them. It wipes everything out. It takes it back to the very beginning, but it also makes things a lot better. All of a sudden, I notice better performance out of everything. So let's not look at a factory reset as, oh my God, this is a bad thing to do. This is giving us opportunity to wipe the slate clean, and let's take advantage of it if at all possible. So I'm going to discuss with you the steps required to get your receiver up to date. Now I'm going to do it fairly quickly. I'm not going to get too in-depth in describing the process to you, simply because by this point, if you have some experience with FrSky, you've gone through registration and bind process. I will also say that there are little cables that come with your receivers. Those things are the hardwire cables for your smart port. The smart port's on the top of your transmitter if it's a tandem or a twin transmitter, with the exception of, I believe it's the X14 where it's on the bottom. Anyways, what you do is something that looks like a receiver. You plug it into there and you can do a hardwired OTA update. You don't need to register and bind in order to do that update. You can just go right to it, and then first thing you do is register and bind the receiver, go in, do a factory reset, and register and bind once again, and you're done. I'm going to take you through the longer, which may be easier process of doing an over-the-air update or OTA update. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure we don't see this, which is those double goose eggs, which means that you're getting absolutely no telemetry. One of the best things about this update is that it greatly enhances the telemetry of the receiver. It gives you some new options and different ways of analyzing telemetry data, especially on receivers. And there's also some mild improvements here and there, which will make the entire experience a lot better. So first thing we're going to do is go into models, go into the RF section. A lot of this should look familiar. We're going to turn on, make sure we have the state is on, the protocols on the TD mode, and we're using the internal module. We're going to go in and do a registration. So you select register. It's below that last screen, just slightly below it. There's a registration button you press. And then what you do is you plug in your receiver while holding the registration button down and powering it up. And you should see this pop up. I am going to show you that for whatever reason, it has a weird name that I did not name this receiver, which leads me to believe that something's a little bit mixed up with this, that somehow gets fixed a little bit later on. So we hit register, you hit yes a couple times, we'll say registration complete. Go into RX1, and you can see at the top that there's no telemetry. There's 2 goose eggs at the very top of the screen there. You select RX1, and that when you do that, it will put you into the bind process, and all you do is plug your receiver in, power it up, and you'll see, hey, there's that weird name receiver once again. And when the bind is successful, you will see this bind OK. When you have this, you might still see goose eggs at the top of the screen, and you're like, oh, okay, why is that? It's because you're still on the old firmware. All you've done is registered and bound to whichever firmware is on the receiver. What we're about to find out is on 1.0.11, and you're not going to get any telemetry data off it. It will work, but what you really want to do at this point is you want to be on version 3.0.1 of the firmware. So what we have to do, and this is something called an OTA update. So some of this, if you've not done this before, you're going to need to look this up. What you have to do is you have to download the firmware. There's something in Ethos Suite called the Download Center, and you can find the firmware there. You download it as a zip file, you unzip it, you put it into a folder on your computer, and then what I did is I created a folder in the same drive that has the audio directory, and I created a folder called firmware, and I dragged all that wonderful new firmware into that firmware directory. And what you see me doing here is I went into system first, which is the gear icon or the SYS button on the transmitter, and I went to file manager, and I navigated to the TD section. That stands for Tandem. I found the 10 channel receivers, and I see that I have 2 options, a TDR10 or TDSR10, and I got to be really certain that I picked the right one. This is the TDR10. If you do not see your receiver listed, that means it is you don't have the right firmware and you shouldn't go any further, but clearly I do have the right firmware. And what I did is I found the .FrSky file, and I put my finger on it for a long period of a second or two, and this popped up. It will say flash RX receiver by internal OTA. I select that, and then it's going to start screaming out bind, which means you need to plug your receiver in once again. And then it's going to tell you, oh yeah, I do have 1.0.11 firmware on this. I know this is really vague. It's showing you current version is this, and yes. What does that mean? It means you have this current version of firmware, and you want to go ahead and update to this newer version of firmware, and you say yes. And when you do that, it's going to send the firmware from the transmitter to the receiver over the air, and it takes about 3 or 4 minutes. And when you're done, it's going to give you this 100% success flash RX by internal OTA. You can close it, you're done, you have the newest firmware on there. And it really depends on which receiver you have. Sometimes you won't even see the name of the receiver, and that gets removed, like as the case was here. Sometimes it does say it, but you'll still see the goose eggs at the top. What you have to do is rebind the receiver. And if you do not see that, well, what I usually do is I press on this, what you see highlighted there. And one of the options is clear. So there's usually like 3 options, and one of them says clear, clear bind, or just clear. And what that does is it clears out the bind, and then you go back and you press that RX1 again, and then plug the receiver in, and then it will say waiting for a receiver, and then it will find the TDR10, which spells out the right one this time. And by the time you're done, you see the TDR10 is working, and all of a sudden you see, wow, for the first time, I do see on the top of the screen that I'm getting telemetry. So this is a very good sign. I am done. Well, you can be done, and it's up to you. But what I suggest is to go one step further, and this is to, once again, press that TDR10, and you're going to see this pop up on the screen. And nowhere on this screen does it say factory reset, but I put a red box around there showing that there's more, because you're not displaying everything. So at the very, very, very bottom is a thing called factory reset, and I select that, and it wipes out the registration and bind. And then not only, if you have a stabilized receiver, you're going to also have to set up the stabilized receiver once again. So you usually want to do this before you actually go through all the down steps of getting the stabilized receiver up and going. Do the factory reset. It's going to clear everything out, and then you go through this whole registration and bind once again. And when you're done, you're going to still have wonderful telemetry. But what I do after this is I go into the model directory and I go into telemetry. First thing I do is delete all sensors, and then I go in and turn on discover new sensors. And after that is done, you get this beautiful blue light, and you have a completely and wonderfully set up receiver without any issues, and you're ready to go, and its receiver is ready for the future. With that, I do thank you for watching. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and otherwise, have yourself a great day.